Just let me know when we're on.
All right, we're going live now. Bismillah.
Oh, God.
What was that?
It is Israeli.
Oh. All right. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Mad Mamluks. My name is Sim. Along with me is my co-host, Shaikh Ahmed.
Assalamu alaikum.
We'll be soon joined by our late Latif friend called Mort. He's running late, as usual. Welcome to the show, everyone. Help us out on patreon.com/the Mad Mamluks. Every little bit helps. We are a completely community-funded effort. We don't make any money off of the show. It is with your support we exist, and any contributions that you give go directly 100% into the show. Some of the things that your donations covers is all the utilities. Sometimes we fly in guests. We support guests in whatever way we can.
Upgrading
hardware and things like that. Yeah, so there's just a lot of expenses related to running a podcast, even when you're not making any money off the show. We all have side gigs, and similar to our guest tonight, Ahmed, who is a real estate planning attorney. What was it?
Estate planning. Inheritance.
Estate planning, not real estate.
Estate planning, yeah. Inheritance stuff.
Old symptom
Asset
bungles.
protection, stuff like that.
And he is a blogger and just a regular agitator who does a lot of investigative journalism. Please welcome to the show, Ahmed Shaikh. Welcome to the show, Ahmed.
Assalamu alaikum. It's great to be back. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Walaikum salam. This is his third time probably on the show, right? Or second time? Easily second time.
No, he's been on. He's been on a few times.
I've been on a few times.
Okay, got it.
Real smooth, Sheikh Ahmed.
Sorry, I knew it was at least 2 times.
It was like 5 times. How about that? Yeah. He's a veteran.
Yes.
Oh well, we don't invite Ahmed Shaikh without due cause. We have plenty of scintillating discussions to have had with him. First of all, the missionary school drama is always unfolding. Is there anything new to report on the issue, Sheikh Ahmed?
I think this is probably going to be the last time we actually put effort into talking about this, because it's not really going to go anywhere. People
want a part 3. I don't know if there is anything.
It's not even about them. I think the parties involved, they just, on that, Islamic Foundation board side, they just keep doubling down, dirty tricks. Going to my workplace, talking to my workplace, and then acting like they don't know that I work there.
Yeah.
Getting that board involved, and now,
Yeah. For anyone who has any doubt that because I know there's some people over there on their side who are denying that they pressured your work.
Yeah.
I have it in documentation from an email.
Yeah.
In email format that they did in fact call them and put pressure on them. So it's a complete lie. I know they're trying to delegitimize some of these claims, but
there's only
we have the truth on our side.
Not only that, there's only a certain amount you can do to help people, right?
Yeah.
The main thing is, alhamdulillah, the missionary's not there, so at least that part worked out. And these people are just going to go and make their rounds and continue bullying people and threatening them and accusing them of, you're going to be accountable for this, you're going to be accountable for that. They try to do that with us. They try to do that with multiple people, and there's no end to this for them. I mean, for us, alhamdulillah, we know what we did was right.
Yeah.
And sometimes standing up for the truth, you have to actually face scrutiny and weather a storm. And I think we're just not going to give them any more attention.
But one of the things, Sheikh, it really hit me when I saw a teacher on one of our Instagram posts related to this issue. Where she's getting upset at us for reposting this, and I'm like, wow, you're a teacher and we're defending teachers. Essentially, I mean, yes, it's all started off with the Christian missionary, but a lot of this stuff in the past had to do with a lot of the teachers and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, yo, we're defending people from your profession, you know?
Yeah.
And it just reminded me of this one conversation I had, and I wrote a little blog post about it. I had with someone who did a lot of relief work, and we were having dinner many years ago, and he was talking to me about a genocide that's happening in a neighboring country, in one of the areas where he was trying to bring relief aid to. So eventually, in that conversation, I said, "Hey, why don't we?" Meaning the Muslims in that region, why don't they send these people weapons to fight, to combat the genocide? And he said, you know, people can give these people weapons, but they need to have a will to fight. You know? And that's just really hit home, and I never forgot it forgot that statement when he said that, because it really clicked, like, oh, you can fight for people all you want. They have to want to fight as well. Like,
Yeah.
You can stick your neck out and, you know, scream at the sun, but if people don't want to,
That's true. Yeah.
don't want to fight for their rights, and they don't want to stand up,
Yeah.
they just want, you know, this no risk revolution, no risk change where, you know, no one sticks their neck out and let someone else go alone onto the battlefield, and you know.
Yeah. I realize a lot of that. It's unfortunate. Look, some people are scared. Some people are worried about their financial security. Some people are worried about their wives and their children. Some people are worried about their reputation. Some people are worried about the friendships that they have with these individuals, right? Some people are worried on so many different levels, and it starts to become that a lot of people don't understand the seriousness of this issue too sometimes, right? I met some people saying that, oh, we have multiple Christians teaching inside of our schools. What's the difference, right? So, I mean, the main issue was this. And the main issue was about the Christian missionary. The main issue also to that was that doubling down and not even being transparent and telling the community that you're going to work on this and make sure this doesn't happen again. But rather doubling down and going after people and bullying people and making them, instead of communicating with us, we took the content down in order for them to communicate with us via email. And then also TMM meets with IFS and all the people that were involved, and they didn't want to do that, right? They just wanted to meet with me individually. And I know why they were doing that. But we didn't take them seriously because we stuck to our end of it and took all of our content down, our content, our property, and they just started playing their sleazy tricks again.
Well, yeah, because they thought we were we were complying because we're in a weak bargaining position.
Yeah.
They thought because they're listening to everything that we say, we're not pushing back at all because we're coming from a position of sincerity. I'm like, okay, really, okay, fine. You know what? Well, sure, here we go. Okay, you want that one down? Okay, that one goes down as well. We'll take down all of our... These are social media posts, aside from the videos.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll take those down. You saw all the texts, Sheikh. And we complained with everything. But what they mistook that
gesture,
willingness or
yeah.
that gesture was, they're scared.
Yeah.
The pressure is too much for them. And... now we can switch our demands and let's say, we don't actually want to meet all you guys. We're just going to figure out with Sheikh Ahmed, and we'll see y'all next time.
Yeah.
You know,
it happened on our platform.
Why did you have a weak bargaining position? I
don't know.
missed that part.
And that's what I'm wondering. I'm like, maybe because the weak bargaining position is because they started releasing HR documentation about various people involved who they thought were the sources for this information, that they thought they were the people involved for this for the information that we received.
I don't.
And
think
they thought that we're applying pressure on these people, so we're going to push back.
I don't think it was just that. I think it was that because this community is so tight knit that they began reaching out to people's families and parents, and exercising pressure and pulling guilt trips, and that in turn led to people reaching out to, to us, and putting the guilt trip, and in order to save those relationships and people, like they wanted to exert pressure that way, right? And so, I mean, honestly, I'm a person that I really don't care, but obviously people's relationships were at stake. And I think the reality is we knew this was going to happen, right? But we thought that we knew it was going to happen. The whole idea was that we were going to do it for the sake of reconciliation, right? We weren't expecting them to actually change anything, but at least we know we did our part when we did that. And we knew they were going to come back and just kind of play around and say, well, oh, nothing really happened. What they wanted to do was save face and come out with a post and say, oh, look, you see, this stuff is down. This is not really until if they were truthful, it would have never been up, right? But obviously we knew that was going to happen. But I think now we can say in good faith that we put it out there. We tried to resolve it, in a way that would be beneficial for the community, in which that meant that we were going to get some guarantees that things were going to change and that they wouldn't do this again. That's why we pulled everything down, because we put our egos and our brand and everything second to what the community demand, or at least desire for the community was. And ultimately this is what happens, and we're cool with that, right? We know that it was we had a feeling it was gonna be that way. But they obviously, they did exactly what we thought they would do.
Exactly.
Have you, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was saying, speaking of corruption.
Yeah. So no, I want Ahmed's thoughts on this kind of stuff, like, because there's so much corruption that we're hearing from mosques all around the country, where people's donations aren't being spent in the right way. People are alleging that their mosque has been using their donations for their own personal or lawsuits or infighting among the leadership of the mosque. What do you think is at the heart of this? Because we, as Muslims, we don't have, at least Muslims in America, we don't have any kind of oversight over nonprofits, and effectively these mosques can use their donations in any way they see fit. And it's one of the reasons why I appreciate people like you who are doing some kind of investigative work, fact checking, trying to follow up on some of these things, because no one else is,
So, I feel like, well, I feel maybe a slightly differently, at least when it comes to masajid. I guess the masjid that I'm that I live near, there's obviously there's a few that there might be people who complain a lot about the way money is spent, or because a lot of it is transparent. Some of it, sometimes you go to places that are not. They might be just one-man shows, and they might just be their own it might be just their own operation, and people just donate because they don't want to be freeloaders, and they might not have as much of a connection with it. But I think a lot of the times when people complain about the way things are being run at their masjid, that's often a very good sign. It means that people actually care about the community and care about the masjid, and care about the future of it, and all that's actually really good. What would be really bad, in my view, is if nobody worried about that stuff at all. When you become an organization that becomes so irrelevant that people don't even ask the right questions or ask questions at all, which I think tends to happen more at when organizations are a little bit more removed from the community, and when they're doing mass marketing. But when it's your own local masjid, when you live nearby, and when there are a lot of people who are willing to volunteer their time and effort and develop relationships that go over, multiple generations and people intermarrying and stuff like that, you're going to have some conflicts and you're going to have disagreements about how money is going to be spent. Sometimes they are serious, and sometimes there is actual corruption. And I've seen it, you've seen it, we've all seen it. But that doesn't necessarily make it the norm. Right? That's actually what goes on. Much of the time, I mean, who are these people that run masajid? That they're often volunteer boards. It's often a very thankless job to do this type of work. It's really just necessary work to do it, and a lot of the times they're going to screw up and they're going to make mistakes. Of course, it's not shocking that somebody makes a mistake. I think what's important, that helps us build better character is what we do when we make a mistake. I mean, how do we actually handle our
Exactly.
mistakes? How do we handle our brothers and sisters' mistakes? And I think that's the important part, not the mistake itself, because I mean, we're all going to screw up. I mean, everybody will, right?
Yeah.
And so and we might spend too much. I mean, even in our own personal lives and our own personal finances. I mean, how often do we like spend too much money on something, and just realize, oh my gosh, what have I just done?
Yep.
And that,
Yeah.
that might happen in like a masjid context as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, Ahmed, I think we're all on the same page here. The problem, I think, the key word that we look for is accountability, right? And when
Yeah.
people take away
Mhm.
when they want to be oblivious to that, or they want to turn away from accountability and shun accountability, I think that's when we have a problem. Because if you're going to be, my personal feeling is that if you're going to be in that position, you volunteered for that, right? You
Right,
also are opening yourself
right.
up to criticism, right? You have to be ready to be accountable for what you've done, right? And then
Yes.
if you don't want to take accountability and just say, okay, the people coming to us with concerns are bad people or bad agents or bad actors, and dismiss it as that, that's when I think the problem comes about.
I think you're right, and I think that's an issue of character sometimes, where sometimes people will want to see themselves as community leaders, but they don't actually want to deal with community.
Yeah.
And community is messy. It's full of complainers. It's full of people who are concerned about one thing or another, or about their children, or about relationships, or about money, or whatever. And you don't if you see yourself as a community leader because you've appointed yourself to that position, because you're a very wealthy person who has become, who wants to use that wealth, and you consider that wealth as a barometer of your wisdom, and then that is something that you think will make you the community leader, because you're the person that writes all the checks, maybe, or a lot of the checks, or brings all of the donors over, or whatever the case may be. And you don't want to deal with riffraff, right? You don't want to deal with people who come up with random stuff that question you, right? People often, and that's unfortunately an issue of character. And what are you there doing as a leader in the Muslim community? Are
Yeah.
you a leader there to serve the community, or is the community basically there to just follow your instructions and not question you?
Ahmed,
Um, yeah.
do you think that people, like, in my experience, I just want to know in your experience, the word volunteer in a religious organization, and since we're talking about masjids, I think sometimes people almost weaponize the fact that they're a volunteer, right? Especially in my
Okay.
experience. Have you seen that too? Like, for instance, something goes wrong, and then they say, "Look, we're just volunteers and we try our best," and it's almost like a cop out for accountability sometimes. You know what I'm saying? Do you see that in your experience too?
I think that's yeah, I have seen it. I don't necessarily know that that's what I would consider to be weaponized. I think what might be what unless of course they're denying, unless they just don't want to be accountable, unless these are serious mistakes, and they are doubling down and creating and making even more serious mistakes. I think
Hmm.
you've actually alluded to some of that. So say, for example, you make a mistake and somebody points it out, and then you go and attack that person personally, right?
Hmm.
Or you go after that person's livelihood,
Right.
or that person's family, or stuff like that, right?
Right.
Yeah.
If you're like, you know what? I mean, gosh, yeah, so we messed up. We hired this contractor, or we did this thing that was a clear conflict of interest and I messed up here, or something along those lines, right? And you're like, oops, I goofed. But I'm a volunteer, so sorry. But I don't know if that's necessarily the weapon, like being the volunteer is the weapon
Hmm.
itself, because obviously when you're talking about like the professional Muslim context as well, like the political organizations or what have you, where people can be significantly more vicious to critics, and they're not volunteers, they're paid, right? And often they're paid well. So
Hmm.
when that happens, I would say that it's just a question of, well, how do you deal with criticism? Like if you're a leader, or if you're just a professional, or you're a person who takes responsibility you're a fiduciary, you take responsibility for money that the community, like the community has a chest, and we all come together and we decide, okay, well, this is where we're all donating. It's going to go to this one place. It's meant to maintain the masjid or maintain a school or pay these salaries, or whatever the case may be. And how good are you doing this job of yours, right?
Hmm.
And why are you doing it? I mean, it's why are you doing it? We all establish what the reasons are. It has something to do with Islam, right? It has something to do with us thriving as a community. And yeah, of course, you have to. There has to be some sort of accountability. But if you're in this culture where everything is a war and anybody that criticizes you is a bad person and thus must be attacked, that's I think that's the problem, right? Not necessarily the volunteer part versus the pay part. I think that people should be encouraged to volunteer, but at the same time, the way when we do say criticize what's happening in individual masajid, um, yeah, of course it can get ugly, and that's the nature of community because we're dealing with human beings. And just like it can be with individual families. This is what I do for a living. I deal with a lot of families. A lot of them get along very well, but a lot of families, it could be a messy, toxic sort of environment, and there could be a lot of exploitation and a lot of corruption even within individual families. So it's not shocking that that could happen within a
Hmm.
individual Muslim community as well.
I think there's
I think,
another. I think there's another
yeah.
element here.
Mm,
This combined with this, with saying, "Oh, I'm just a volunteer." Some of these individuals that take these volunteer positions, unfortunately, take them on because they're great resume builders, meaning that if they're looking for certain jobs, certain promotions, they require, they'd like to see that you're involved in the community. There's some
Hmm.
philanthropy, and it falls in line with that. And they kind of
mm,
satisfy the prerequisite and say, oh, you know what? I'm part of my community. I'm on this board. I'm on that board. I'm a chairman here.
Yeah, board sounds nice.
Right, the board sounds nice, right? I'm an advisor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really about the title rather than the obligation, right? Because there's some benefit to them, whether it be monetarily or in their professional life
Reputation.
or
Yeah.
even in their friend circles, right? It's a nice title to have. Oh, this is the board of a member of the masjid, or this is the, I don't know, whatever it may be, right? Vice president. And some of those people who do that, when brought, when it's about accountability, they'll say, well, I don't get paid for this. I'm a volunteer. I really don't. I'm not really suitable for this position. I just I'm helping out. I'm doing it out of the goodness of my heart. I shouldn't have to have all this responsibility. I'm not getting paid to do this, and it's a convenient excuse. And for me, I feel like if they are one of those people who use this for a title, right? Which is, I personally don't have anything directly against that, but
mm-hmm,
if you're going to do that, the responsibility should still be there, right?
Yeah.
Meaning that you shouldn't be
right.
able to dismiss it and say, "Oh, well, I'm just here as a volunteer," right? I think that's a big problem.
I don't think necessarily people should just dismiss things because they're a volunteer. And even if they were that, okay, well, if you goofed and you screwed up, as long as they acknowledge it and, try to fix it, depending on what the screw up is, because it could be serious enough that that's it, that's the end for you. But if it's, it's something that depends on how much accountability there is within that individual community, because I know that there are communities where there just isn't a lot of accountability. But as far as the aspect of volunteering, goodness of your heart, etc., I think that there are a lot of benefits to be had from volunteering within your community as well that are, not necessarily just purely service, but I guess they kind of are. I mean, you get to meet new people, right?
Mm-hmm.
You might meet the mayor, right? Or
Right.
you're going to have your picture taken with the police chief or whatever, right? I mean, you might run for office. I mean, there have been people who've run Masajid, and on the strength of that have gained like political support and
Sure.
friends and stuff like that, right? So that definitely has happened. But it's also extremely social, right? And that comes with even like things like my writing. Like I write some articles,
Mm-hmm.
and part of the process of writing and after I write it, I actually talk to a lot of people. I mean, I've
Yeah.
made numerous friends all over the country.
And enemies.
Just well, I don't know. But as far as just in terms of speaking to people and discussing problems, and I mean, the writing does a lot. Just with respect to that, if I weren't writing, I probably wouldn't be talking to you folks, right? I mean, it's like,
Mm.
who is this guy otherwise? But it's part of the volunteer process is like that as well. Sometimes it's a lot of work, right? Some of these people are volunteering for Masajid. They might be in some conference call or some meeting practically every day. They might not get to see their kids that much. I know that,
Mm-hmm.
when I was at ISNA, there was a massive volume of just stuff, and a lot of it wasn't very productive stuff, but there was just a lot of stuff that was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think also there's another element too that kind of contributes to the problem, and I'm not sure if it's a problem that you guys have in your area, but we
Right.
certainly struggle with it here, and that is the idea of a lifelong board member or chairman or whatever it is, right? So no matter
Mhm.
what they do, it doesn't matter. Even if they take accountability, it doesn't really matter because they're there for a lifelong, and so no one's going to remove them, right? And I believe that I think that if something is bad enough, it warrants removal. Like people should be, and I think if people have to prove to the community that they're worthy of having that position, whether by voting or by whatever process it is, right? It makes people more conscious and more responsible of what they're going to be doing because they have it enforces accountability,
Yeah,
right?
oversight.
Right,
Right.
exactly. Hmm.
I think that's a problem, and one of the issues with Muslim nonprofits is that they take a lot of their cues from the way nonprofits work in the United States in general.
Hmm.
And so when I write about places like Islamic Relief, or I mean just practically anybody, right? A lot of these nonprofits, I mean, I might be critical of them, but in many ways they might actually be dramatically better than a lot of non-Muslim nonprofits out there. And this problem of what's often referred to as like founder syndrome, right? Where somebody just feels like, well, they started the thing and they're just essential and they're just going to stay on until they die or something.
We have that here
Um,
too. We
right.
we got,
I mean, that exists
we got a
everywhere.
shadow president, and then you got the puppet presidents because he's the actual founder of the mosque. So he just
Right.
stays in the background and he makes sure his family members are all over the board. So we have
Yeah.
that problem as well over here.
Yeah.
I think that problem kind of exists everywhere where people see themselves as being essential. And if anybody, I mean, if you're building something where you're always going to be essential to it, you haven't really built anything,
True.
right?
Good point.
Because that's a chronic problem all over the place. I mean, I remember here like one of the people I used to work with was talking about his experiences with this was years ago. I don't know if they're still like this, but American Youth Soccer, right? AYSO, where he was complaining about these board members who were there when their kids were in soccer, and now they're in the board, and they don't want to give up their little power, even though they're like in their 80s. They just want to stay there in power. Um, and that's kind of like that with a lot of other people. They built this little kingdom. They have some power, and they just don't want to give it up, and they don't want to become irrelevant. I think that that's also the case with a lot of people in general, they want to be, I think there's a desire to be relevant in the larger community or in a group,
Mm-hmm.
or be seen as a community leader. They don't want to be a, you don't want to be considered to be a has-been.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's obviously a concern. Of course, one of the things that one of the remedies to something like this as well is the fact that there are so many other masajid out there. Sometimes people just stay there and they lose relevance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that there have been a number of Muslim organizations that are like that. I mean, people just sort of work around them, find another place, build a new masjid. I think we have, like in my area, of course, a lot of there's a lot of masajid here in Southern California in Orange County, just like there are in Chicago. I'm sure you guys probably have more. But one of the things that you'll notice about masajid that crop up is that often they're created by people who are veterans of some sort of fitna that took place at another masjid, right?
Oh yeah.
So if you
You're
if you go back in
stealing.
the history of a
I
masjid,
love
it's
that. The
usually
veterans of a fitna, bro. I love that.
No,
That's so
because
true.
and you're literally giving the script for
What
some of
happened
the
here?
some of the issues that are happening here.
Yeah. Yeah.
right, right.
Like the very
I
early
mean,
community that had a very deep divide, and they just kind of, okay, we're splitting.
You were
That's it.
splitting. We're creating
It's-
another mosque, and
yeah.
then they bring their same problems to a new
It's
mosque. You know?
the
they
irreconcilable
do, but there's a new
differences.
masjid,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
And so a lot of the masajid are just they're spreading. A lot of times, years later, they might actually become friends, right?
Yep.
The people that run the different masajid, they'll all become friends later on. But they started from a place of like, well, we're fighting each other. You know what? We're leaving. We're starting a new masjid, and now we have more masajid, and they all fill up. They're all successful, alhamdulillah. And it's
Yeah.
just a process of growth in the community. Sometimes you have these
Too many chiefs.
these problems. Well, yeah, you have these problems, but the result is just there's more places to pray, right?
Yeah, speaking of founderism and being relevant, like I kind of
Yeah,
want to segue into something that we want to talk about here, which is
yeah.
like this whole suicide thing, right? It feels like a lot of people have founded an organization that wants to be relevant and wants to get funding, and so they come up with data and they come up with an idea that there's this crisis, existential crisis facing the Muslims, that we have the highest suicide rates, and we have to get all the money and all the attention, and everything has to be hyper focused here now because this is the next big thing that we're going to be, dealing with. And
Yeah.
so
I think we have to pray. So let's just leave it there. I want you
Cliffhanger.
to I want you to address that right after our little short prayer break, Ahmed. It's Maghrib time over here. I don't know if you
Okay.
pray, but hopefully you do,
Astaghfirullah.
inshallah.
Sorry.
It's not Maghrib. It's not Maghrib here in Southern California. So go on ahead and pray.
All right, we'll be back in a
Make
few
make
minutes.
make dua for me. Inshallah, I'll pray
Inshallah,
Maghrib when it's
inshallah.
time here.
I'm making dua. Sheikh Ahmed doesn't start Tarawih right now. Usually his prayers can run a few minutes too long.
Dude,
Let's just say that.
I'm an ikhlas and a falaq, bro. That's it.
I resent those comments against the Shaykh.
All right, we'll be back.
Hopefully. Inshallah. Don't be like Yajuj and Majuj, bro. Say inshallah.
Okay, I reminded the listeners to say mashallah. Oh, I hope they didn't leave us. I hope they're still around.
All right.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.
I'm back. Okay.
All right.
And so are we.
Let me just.
Are we back online?
Yes,
I mean, are we back on the air?
Oh yeah, we were always on the air. We just put up a splash screen to let people know
Okay.
we're praying.
Okay.
All right. I'm gonna. Mort's just putting on his headset real quick. Yeah, how's that for authenticity, listeners? Right? It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
They get to see us that we went to pray and,
Oh, yeah.
you know.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, I mean, they don't actually get to see you pray or
Yeah, it's
listen
true.
to your
we
tajweed
were
or
just
anything
playing
like
a
that.
recording from last week.
But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, Mort, take it off.
Unfortunately, suicide.
Yeah, no. So I think we left off at where we were talking about, founderism and needing to be relevant and finding those new causes to create that relevance. And the first thing that comes to mind is the article that you've been written, or the topic you've been actually talking about is like this claim that there's this new existential threat that is this high Muslim suicide rate. Like Muslims have the highest suicide rates, and the first thing I think about is obviously somebody is founding this new initiative. Somebody is trying to get some funding. Somebody is sounding the alarm bells, making it like it's this existential crisis.
No,
that
I believed it
Muslim
for a while
parents-
too. I believed it for
Yeah,
a while.
but so why don't we talk about that? Like, because I think it's relevant to this, right? That it feels like that people in their quest to become relevant and to be recognized as trailblazers and pioneers in the Muslim community, they come up with these outrageous claims, like we've got to worry, and so why don't we speak about this?
Let's just, as a pretext to this, I want to, from the Mad Maluks and our guests as well, give our condolences to the murder-suicide that happened in Dallas. We're cognizant of what happened over there. For those who aren't aware, a family, there was a murder-suicide where one of the parents killed their children and themselves as a result of one of their daughters drowning a few weeks ago, and our heartfelt condolences. We pray for them, and we hope.
I was unaware, but I mean, again, the focus is that this is some kind of existential crisis that Muslims are facing.
Yeah, no,
I know. This just happened yesterday,
Yeah.
so that's why I had to bring it up, because I know there's people watching and they're like, how could they be talking? This was pre-planned before. This was planned before,
right?
And we didn't have any. This wasn't
in response
to that,
right.
I mean, that's a tremendous tragedy for the individuals and the whole community. And the community, this is Allen, Texas, I believe, right? And this is the exact same community that had almost the exact same thing happen a couple of years ago with the Muslim family with murder-suicide.
I remember that. The sons,
that occurred.
Yeah.
It happened in the same. It happened
Wow.
basically in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, of course, we have Muslims that attempt suicide or that commit suicide, that murder, I mean, there's just a lot. There's a lot of. I mean, there's a lot of human beings, and there's a lot of. I mean, we're all human beings, and there are definitely going to be societal problems. I think that this particular study that came out a few years ago this was at JAMA Psych. And look, I write about Muslim organizations. That's one of the things that I do, and it kind of started when talking about CVE, and we talked about CVE on this show before a few years ago, and one of the things I discovered about with CVE and just getting into understanding nonprofits is that nonprofits like money. People who run nonprofits like money. And sometimes they like it a little bit too much, and they're willing to go pretty far to get it. and what does that actually mean in practice? I started writing about zakat, right? Because of some of the organizations that were scamming or grifting when it comes to CVE were doing the same thing with zakat, right? And are you guys there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
we're
No, we're
here.
listening.
Okay, okay. So when this was, that's kind of the trajectory where I started writing about Zika. Um, one of the things that I've kind of learned about the Muslim community, and maybe this is just sort of my limited perspective, or we obviously see what we see,
Hmm.
and we're limited by that. Is that if when an organization starts to collect Zaka, um, they end up automatically becoming suspect. Um, Not necessarily because they're bad organizations or anything like that, but I think that when I say suspect, I mean that it's something that does deserve scrutiny. Um, and especially if it's for something that is not traditionally what we consider to be zakat eligible, or something that we at least were raised to understand what zakat is. And I understand that there are a variety of interpretations of how zakat is supposed to work and who gets it. And what I've seen about zakat in the United States is that it's simply a mechanism to transfer wealth from the affluent to the affluent. And that makes me a little bit concerned. And that's one of the things that I've written about extensively. Now, with respect to this JAMA Psych article, it was this sheikh over here in Irvine, Usman Umarji, who had looked at the numbers. He's the first person who had done this, and he found that it just doesn't make any sense. It's just wrong. And he wrote a comment, and he wrote a detailed analysis that he sent over to JAMA Psych.
And what is
Um,
JAMA Psych for the uninitiated?
so JAMA Psych is the Journal of the American Medical Association Psychiatry.
Hmm.
And they do they basically do articles on psychiatry, and this is a research. I believe it's called a research letter.
Hmm.
It's a little bit higher degree than a letter to the editor. It's not a full-on article, and it has a much lower standard of publication.
Hmm.
It is technically peer-reviewed, but the peer reviewers don't actually look at the data. They don't evaluate it. And there's just a lot of stuff that they don't do to scrutinize what's in it.
Wait,
Hmm.
hold
Um,
on there. So if they don't actually look
mhm.
at the data, what are they peer reviewing? The opinion?
Well, yeah, basically. They
Okay.
they figured that you did your math and you did your homework, and they're not going to re-review the numbers or anything
So
like
it's like
that.
an
That's
honor
not their
based.
job.
It's an honor based system. Or is
It
it?
is, it is, unfortunately.
Hmm.
I mean, that's just the way it works in a lot of these types of fields. Um, People just put stuff out, and very frequently this research, and this is there's a specific problem in mental health as well, with mental health related research, that people can just say all kinds of stuff. And we're just we've seen a number of really weird things happen over time with this particular profession. I mean, the mental health field has been a problem from almost at the beginning. I mean, just in terms of like when we talked about CVE, like the war on terrorism, just their use in armed conflicts, their use in things like torture, their use in, I mean, their use in just scamming people. I mean, just in terms of marketing and such, and manipulating human beings. It's just something that's been going on for quite a while. There's been a lot written about it, and yeah, that's just an ongoing problem. It's been an ongoing problem within the Muslim community as well. When we talk about the stigma, like for mental health treatment, stigma is not the stigma that ordinary Muslims have. The stigma has to do with the profession itself, because it
Hmm.
has a pretty sordid history, and that I think the profession needs to get over, because frankly there are, just like we know from the incident that happened, as well as many people that we might know, there's a lot of need for people to get help, but sometimes the people that are doing that are meant to help are maybe doing more harm than anything else. When it comes to this whole thing with the Osman Omarji, the authors of this article started to attack him. Pretty viciously, actually, online, called him a troll and a liar and spreading misinformation. That stuff was just out there for like a year or so.
What was it about
Before
his letter to them that they said that it was, whether it be inflammatory or trolling or inaccurate? What was it that he had said to Chamasike?
So he had just said that the numbers that their conclusions were incorrect because they made a statistical error. This error has been known in statistics for over 100 years, and that's something called the suppressor effect. And so basically the idea is that you have these data sets where there's Muslims versus non-Muslims, who's committing or who's attempting to commit suicide more often, and you have these ethnic groups, right? That they have in there. There's Arabs, which is a race or ethnicity that's special to ISPU's their formula of looking at things. There's of course there's Asians and there's white people. There were a lot of white people in ISPU surveys in general, and what they found was that Muslims were twice as likely as anybody else to attempt suicide, because they were Muslim, and how religious they were didn't matter. They could be very religious and they would still be twice as susceptible to attempting suicide. And the only real reason they would do that is because they are Muslim. And this is pretty shocking. I mean, just as a conclusion, it's incredibly shocking. But they did it adjusting for demographic factors. And so they had to massage the numbers. And so the statistical error that they came up with, or that they did, was the suppressor effect. Here, what happened was that there were Arabs who were Muslim, but there were no Arabs that were not Muslim. And so you didn't have anything to compare against. The data on Asians as well was pretty weak when it came to non-Muslims. Of course, there are quite a few within the Muslim community, and it was a complete mess. Just in terms of, well, how can you adjust to numbers that you don't even have? I mean, if you don't even have any Arabs that are not Muslim, how do you compare one against the other? And it's going to come out as being completely garbled and nonsensical. And so that's basically what happened here, is that you came out with a result that was just shocking. Because when you actually have numbers, when you start out with the raw numbers, there really isn't, it's within the margin of error. Muslims, there were the Muslims who were surveyed, quite a few of them said that they attempted suicide, but it was within the margin of error for other groups, and the margins of error were actually kind of huge. And if we're talking about margins of error, you're probably familiar with that concept in political polling, because basically what they're doing here is it's political polling. They took a political polling firm. They got a sample from people. It's not an epidemiological study or anything like that. It was just political polling, and they tacked on questions along with the Democrat-Republican sort of questions, because ISPU sold these questions to some people who wanted to do this, and who wanted to do this study.
Question there: Did they make any distinction between have you thought about committing suicide versus attempting suicide?
So, as I understand it, the question had to do with attempting suicide.
Okay.
Right. The question was attempted suicide. But the numbers were not, because these studies have been done in other countries. And this is something that was pointed out by the authors as well. Muslims tend to not attempt suicide as much as, they have pretty low numbers around the world. There's something special about American Muslims that makes them twice as likely to attempt suicide. This didn't make any sense.
What was the sample?
Check, it does make sense because we are victims of racism, of white supremacy, and of course it would make sense that we would want to kill ourselves because the white man's wanting to kill us. He's seeking
Well,
to oppress
I
us and
mean,
make us his new
those are
slaves.
things that they, especially the discrimination question. I mean, that's something that they could have come up with if they wanted to. If they have, if they wanted to say stuff like that, they could have come up with data that demonstrated it.
Like, do you
But they
feel
didn't have
suicidal
that.
because of X, Y, and Z? Like, because of due to
Right.
pressure? Right. They could have
I
added
mean,
on a condition to this
yeah.
question that would specify what drove the suicidal ideations or whatever.
Yeah, if they wanted to do that, they could have. Of course, they want more money to do more studies potentially. They also want more money because they're a nonprofit and they have a salary. They have salaries to run, and I mean, they're just people in nonprofits who want money. So that's going to be a chronic problem, especially zakah. They're always going to want zakah, right?
Right.
And so if you are going to come up with a study and state that, Muslims are just as likely as everybody else to attempt suicide, or they're less likely to attempt suicide, I mean, how compelling is that as a pitch for donations?
Yeah. I mean, I
How
think it would
compelling is
be
it as a pitch for more funding?
right. I mean, I think if you're going to be doing that, it's in your interest to keep it very generalized. Like, don't give specific reasons as to why they do it. Just say there's a massive problem, right? And then you can obviously capitalize on zero in on specific issues depending on what you want to fundraise for, right? But to present this huge problem that, oh my God, Muslims are committing suicide all over the place, 2 times higher than other people, right? That in of itself is like, oh my God, we've got a problem, right?
Right.
And so,
And doesn't it present this problem where why would people want to become Muslim then? Like, oh my God, you guys have it worse than us.
yeah, you guys are depressed.
You guys are saying like you guys have the solution, and you guys have this message that brings tranquility and peace to your heart and a wider society, and it has all these solutions for us. No, it doesn't. You guys are killing yourself.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
Yeah. I think
yeah.
that only works if you're just going through an enormous amount of therapy, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
yeah.
yeah, that's the solution. That's the new priesthood, I guess.
So here's my thing. I think I mean, not to downplay the importance of mental health, right, for people who
Hmm.
need it, right? But I do think we are in this culture of enablement that pretty much everything under the sun can qualify as a mental illness or a mental problem, right? I mean, it's a mental distress. And we've created this culture of, unfortunately, in our communities where it's a business to be involved in therapy, to be involved in, a counseling. And they realized that there's a very niche market for this, right? Because there's a practical application and that there is a spiritual application to this, right? I mean, because people who are Muslims that want to seek counseling are more likely to seek someone who understands their spiritual needs as well too, or at least cognizant of it. And so in the spirit of that, what a great way to market yourself. Oh my God, you need us, you need to fund us because this is an existential crisis that we're facing. Your children are going to be 2 times more likely to commit suicide than their peers, right? On top of, and then you can add on all the icing on the cake, right? The Islamophobia, the problem of genders, the problem of this, and whatever, not getting married. So many things you can pile on top of that base point that you're making, that wow factor, right? Unfortunately, I feel like a lot of Muslim groups and organizations have profited immensely off of the idea of therapy and counseling, and they don't always mean well. They don't always actually want to find solutions. Unfortunately, I know of cases in particular where they actually don't want to find a solution. They want to further the problem because it's more profitable for them, right?
So if I can chime in a little bit, I think there's a few things, at least for the listeners, because I think we kind of skipped a beat, and it's fine.
Yeah.
But if we can just backtrack a little bit. Number one, that because of social media and all these other factors, breaking up of the nuclear family, and whether they're Muslims that are older or younger, there's definitely going to be changes that occur on the cognitive level to especially young people. Like, so we can't completely, I'm just thinking in from conversations that I've heard, Muslims are no different. We hear that all the time. Muslims are no different than the rest of society, right? especially those that are born and raised for second generation. We have the same problems that everybody else has. So it's not limited to just non-Muslim Americans. It's a human problem. That's one issue that people usually say. So why is it? My question is, how did the study come about that Muslims are 2 times or 100% more likely to commit suicide, right? I think that's what the study's saying, right?
That's right.
So how did they come to that conclusion in specific? I'm pretty sure they didn't just state it, right? They had to have some...
No, that's what he's saying. They took data. Yeah, go ahead.
So what happened was that they did something called regression analysis.
Yes.
They took some numbers that came from ISPU and they put it in a software program. They identify what the software program is in their article. And they just, it's a pretty easy process. It doesn't take very long. And they did regression analysis based on the demographic factors that they placed in there. Now, the Muslim community, according to ISPU, the ethnicity of the American Muslim community was 26% black, 26% white, 24% Asian, 10% other, and 14% Arab. Right? That's now that the concern there. I mean, there's a few issues going on. One is that you notice that white non-Arab whites were 26% of the Muslim community. That seemed high to me, and I think it seemed high to a bunch of people. That seems pretty high. Now, the thing is, white people are much more, they tend to, I mean, in other studies, they tend to be much more likely to attempt suicide than other groups.
So wait a minute, what does that actually mean if it's non-Arab white? Does that mean like actually Anglo-Saxon, like Irish, German, like...
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah, because I mean, obviously, Arabs, a lot of Arabs, of course, identify as white. And have historically been considered white, but I think now there's a political move, primarily because of the funding with and just the idea of wanting to be a marginalized ethnicity or whatever. I mean, it just to separate out Arabs or MENA people or something like that. And so now there's an effort to kind of separate that out. Even though, of course, it's an ethnicity. It's people who speak Arabic could be white or black, or they can be different colors, right? But
Right.
but yeah, here we're separating out Arabs. So the other 26%. Yeah, you're talking about like Swedes and Irish and stuff like that. I
Okay,
think that's what.
so
That's what
before
is
you
primarily
go
meant
any
by that.
forward from that, do we know the sample size that they took?
We do, yeah, we do.
And how many people were they?
We have that as well. I have to look at it, but I think it was like they took 2 different surveys, right? So they did like actually they surveyed Muslims, they surveyed Jews, and they surveyed everybody else. And so ISPU does that. I think they do that like every single year, and they ask a variety of questions. In some cases, like in this particular one, this is from 2019, where they actually sold the questions. So that it was the Muslims in mental health and Khalil Center, and these people they actually purchased questions.
So do we know if it was like a few hundred or a couple thousand? Like, do we know?
It was in the thousands.
Okay.
Total. Yeah.
And then
I don't have the numbers right in front of me.
No,
but,
no problem.
But
I
that's
mean, I don't want the
available.
exact. I'm just kind of getting an idea of it.
Yeah.
And I want to know, like, was it in specific communities? Like, I mean, did they target nationwide, or was it worldwide, or how do they go about this? Like a sample size? Do we know that?
So it's not completely random. They actually have the organization that they used for because ISPU doesn't do the polling itself. They use a company. This is called Social Science Research Solutions. And one of the things I mentioned in my article is that they're a C-rated pollster. 538 rates them. They have, and their ability to predict elections is like about 60%. They actually have a panel, so they ask a lot of the same people this questions over and over again, and so it's not completely random, as I understand it.
Okay, and so on that panel, they chose. I mean, they obviously took from their existing panel the Muslims that were people who happen to be Muslims.
Yeah, there probably is a random element to it as well. I mean, their methodology is published on their own website as to how they do it, but as I
Mm-hmm.
understand it, it's not completely random. But the end result, and it's not necessarily to attack the pollster or even ISPU in this particular instance, because the ISPU when they did their when they reported out their Muslim survey, they didn't mention mental health or suicide at all
Mm-hmm.
as part of this study. That came later. That came
Yeah,
in
you're
JAMA
talking about someone
later
that
on.
came out and took the raw, unaggregated data and massaged it and made it look like that there was a problem.
That's right. That's right. So it wasn't really the data itself because the data was not conclusive of anything. You can't really make any conclusions from the data that they came up with. It was just useless, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
but what happened afterwards was if you take it and put it through some sort of software program, and where it's not designed to actually handle that. How do you compare when you're going to do these sets and you're going to look at data and you're going to compare, say, Muslim Arabs versus non-Muslim Arabs, but you don't have any non-Muslim Arabs to compare against. What's going to happen? It's going to look weird.
Yeah.
And so a lot of funky things could be done with data, and this has been known by statisticians for a long time. So that's a pretty well-established thing. What's more, and this is actually the biggest issue with respect to this, is that they accused Usman Umarji about lying about the suppressor effect.
Mm-hmm.
And that there is no suppressor effect. And they went through three Ivy League statisticians who all said that this whole suppressor effect thing was nonsense, but we don't know who these statisticians were. And then in their own private letter to JAMA, they admitted that Usman Umarji had a point. They admitted that there would be a suppressor effect.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, they actually they admitted to all of this stuff in private, but in public they were attacking him. So they had their reasons for why it is that they should keep the article there or whatever. But as far as the suppressor effect and that the error, they wanted to have public discourse on suicide. So it was important to have like a discussion about suicide. So this was pretty bad. It looked pretty bad from my perspective. These are people who are, these are public figures within the Muslim community. They're often teachers about, they're often, they teach on Islamic studies or, go out and give lectures to large groups of Muslims. But this looks like a clear grift to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not right. It's not honorable to go and accuse a sheikh of lying of when he was telling the truth, and they knew he was telling the truth, and they
Mm-hmm.
admitted as much privately.
Yeah.
And so that was the real problem here, is that this is garbage. This study is absolutely garbage, and there is no response to my article. I mean, frankly, nobody has been able to rebut any of this stuff. Because Usman Omarji, he's the one that put in the work, and he was 100% right.
Mm-hmm.
And how many Muslim organizations actually use these statistics on suicide?
I don't know, but it's I think Rania Awad is like a big person in her field, right? In this Muslim mental health business, and I know that a lot of them have used it at least in the past. I know that it's kind of been discredited. I think it should be more discredited. I think it is unfortunate that people who have made mistakes this serious are still considered to be leading voices within the Muslim community, and basically be, I mean, it's that seems like that's a shame to me. However, she is doing these Muslim mental health trainings for imams and wanting to be the main conduit for imams and religious leaders to understand mental health or understand it through her particular lens. But she and other people in her cohort that are involved with this. I mean, we should be very skeptical of them operating within the Muslim community given this record.
Well, her article is still on Muslim Matters. It
I
comes
mean,
with
she just wrote in the Washington Post, and she's busy. she's busy. She's sought after within the Muslim community. The article, I think the article pointing all of this stuff out, has probably had very, very limited effect. Um, just I don't know that to what extent this whole thing is being used to market zakat for them or anything at this point. But it's a really serious problem that people can just put this stuff out, falsely accuse a sheikh of lying and being a troll and all of that, and just get away with it just because they have a big platform.
So speaking of zakat eligible and like
Hmm.
nonprofits, you
Yeah.
did also post something about how, in conjunction with this Islamic mental health, and like Muslim nonprofits, and how some of these the disconnect between these imams and what some of the values of these nonprofits are, and these nonprofits being at odds with the statement that our Muslim imams have come out with, but these same on the LGBTQ issue, but yet
Okay.
these same organizations are zakat eligible, and they actually endorse the idea of embracing, ideas and causes that are completely opposed to Islam, but under the guise of us fighting for minority rights of Muslims, that we also have to fight for the rights of other minorities, including the ones who the Quran condemns as sodomites and people
And
condemned to hellfire.
before you start talking about it, I want to read one of the quotes that you put on your article,
Yeah.
because it's freaking amazing. The liberation of the American Muslim community is profoundly linked to the liberation of other minority groups, blacks, Latinos, gay, Jewish, trans, and every other community that has faced discrimination and oppression in this country. That is a quote from Nihad Awad, the executive director of CARE National. So these are your leaders, folks, who have already co-signed along with the LGBTQ movement, while our religious leaders, who sent out that communication and signed it off. What Ahmed is saying here effectively is that we have this one statement, but our non-for-profits are saying something completely different.
And I think there's also a problem in that a lot of these imams also work with these nonprofits. A lot of these nonprofits get substantial credibility because of the fact that the imams endorse or work with them, right? So there's a disconnect between what the imams are saying versus what the mission statement of some.
Do you think it's a disconnect, or do you think it's Muslims kind of speaking from the both sides of their mouth, where they're just like, no, we kind of keep one group happy over there, the orgs, the non-for-profits keep the LGBTQ allies a little happy, and then the imams keep the religious people happy?
I know it sounds like
So
that, but
to be fair, especially to be fair to CARE and to Nihad Awad, that particular quote happened in the immediate aftermath of the Pulse nightclub. And there's a different social and political context to that particular era. I'm not saying that what he said was the right thing to say. Also, with respect to CARE, is that right now, like with Montgomery County, for example, where all of this stuff was happening with respect to the I think parents just want notification of certain things being taught in schools. CARE is, as I understand it, supporting them and supporting Muslims, or speaking in favor of Muslims who are who want to make sure that their religion and their values are respected. And that particular quote, I don't think that anybody over there at CARE would say that today. And what's more is that I think one CARE executive director is a signatory, one person who identifies as an imam. Dawood Walid, I believe, is one of the signatories of that particular statement as well. I think that within the Muslim community, there's definitely a disconnect between organizations that are, and I think I've written about this in the context of zakat before as well, but I think this is an issue that cuts across different issues as well. There are organizations that are sovereign, like we want the Muslim community to be sovereign, And then there are Muslim organizations that are essentially vassals. And the vassal organizations tend to operate in the political sphere more than anywhere else. And so, say, for example, you've got Engage. Engage is speaking. There are a couple of Engage speakers at ISNA this Labor Day weekend, for
Are
example.
you coming?
And I Right, and I've written about that, and I've written about Engaged in ISNA's own publication in Islamic Horizons. They are an organization that is almost completely funded from outside of the Muslim community,
Mm-hmm.
and their priorities come from outside of the Muslim community. There, and in the LGBTQ space in particular, there are a number of Muslim organizations that are almost entirely funded, Muslim organizations or organizations that identify as Muslim, that are also outside. I mean, they're funded completely outside of the Muslim community, and so they are essentially attempting to hijack the Muslim voice. And the Muslim, what it actually means to be somebody who speaks out for Muslims or in favor of Muslims to further another agenda, right?
Right.
And we're not, as a community, we're not capable of telling the difference. And so with a conference like ISNA, you're going to have people that are Muslims, but they're really there pushing products that pushing somebody else's product. That has nothing to do with Islam or the Muslim community or our values. The values that are being pushed are those that are of other political interests. And that's been a chronic problem that I've noticed at least since the CVE days, where we've had a bunch of astroturfing happening within the Muslim community. And I should say, even on, I mean, I know that he's been, wasn't he like your co-host before? Like even on the side of the Montgomery County folks, and this is like Ismail Royer, right?
Yeah.
He's obviously on the side of the parents. But he works for a Christian organization, and this is something that, I know one of my friends who's very pro LGBTQ identified this issue to me, and he's like, well, here's somebody who is also not, he doesn't really work for a Muslim organization. And so when you're not doing that, when you're not actually working for the community, and you're working for another community as a Muslim, speaking for Muslims, speaking for the cause of Islam or Muslims or whatever, there's something funky going on there. And there really isn't any need for that. I mean, Muslims shouldn't need money. I mean, to be Muslims shouldn't need money from outside of the Muslim community for their community efforts.
I mean, I call it
There's
a Trojan
absolutely
horse.
no need for that.
It's a Trojan horse, right? You have someone who's,
Right.
under the guise of saying, I've got a Muslim name, I have some Muslim contacts, and they're pretty much Muslim on the outside, but the agenda is something un-Islamic. But coming back to what Sim was saying, I don't think these imams are saying, we're gonna say this now. You care, go out and say the opposite, just to make it palatable. I don't think that is what is happening. I think the reality is that imams see themselves in a different space and they're addressing different issues, and
So I've been plenty critical of CARE on many occasions. One thing I can say for CARE, at least I don't know about CARE Chicago, but I think a lot of CARE chapters is that they tend to be responsive to the Muslim community. So they tend to be an organization that will, I mean, if they're going to meet the Muslim community where they are, not where they hope it would be. So if there's a left-wing organization that really wants us to vote Democratic all the time and be in with the Democratic coalition and believe all of the orthodoxies that the Democratic Party is supposed to believe in that particular year, that's not CARE. At least as I understand it. There are other organizations like that, but CARE is not one of them.
Okay. Well, that's fair. And I'm glad to see that you're impartial and you can give that objectivity along and give some context around the nature of how CARE is, because that was my reading as well, that they are sensitive to a lot of the sentiments
Right.
that Muslims are feeling, and especially related to what's going on with the LGBTQ
I
indoctrination.
think the key is to actually be connected to the masjid, right? And I think one of the things that, I mean, I don't know about all care leaders, but a number of care leaders, and that I believe includes Nihad by reputation. I don't know him personally. I've like met him briefly, but I mean, but by reputation, I understand that he is very connected to his local masjid and his local Muslim community. And I think that's true for a lot of other Muslims, is that, this is where the Muslim community is kind of heading. I think that there was a period of time, and this is just our political context, right? I mean, where we have this binary political system, and well, we've got this Republican Party that hates us, and wants us dead or in camps or whatever, and here's the Democratic Party, and they're willing to put us into this constellation of marginalized groups that are going to agree with democratic priorities, and let's go along with that because it's necessary for us
So
to do
Ahmed,
that.
let
So
me stop
yeah,
you there. Do you think that because CARE is probably the largest organization of its kind, right, that we have in
okay.
America, right?
Hmm.
Um, I would like to see, or at least envision that to be an organization that sets the standard for Muslims. Meaning that I know what the point that you made is that there are vessels and then there are sovereign entities, and CARE possibly being a vessel, meaning that they're just
No,
representing.
I think care. I don't think the organization is sovereign. And I mean, the organization might not be sovereign. I mean, I think the Muslim community has to be sovereign, right? And a representative of that sovereign Muslim community is, and you would hope that, okay, well, maybe it's care. And then if you think about it, like the Muslim community they're going to move on certain things depending on the context of the situation where, okay, well, if the LGBTQ community seems marginalized, or you don't want people to be discriminated against, that's one thing. But if it's just if they're throwing their political weight around and making us want to change our religion and change who we are and change what we believe, that's a little bit different.
So I think that that's the
Yeah,
problem that I'm getting at. That like because
yeah,
what I'm saying is that CARE is made up of people, as you mentioned, who are part of the community, right?
yeah.
So
Hmm.
what I'm saying is that if you want them to be sovereign, and CARE has an ability to communicate our message to the outside world because they are a mouthpiece essentially, shouldn't they have a greater responsibility to say, listen, we're setting the tone because we know what the community wants, right? Like, I mean, it's one thing to say, because what if tomorrow the community says, you know what, we want to support the right for women to take off, whatever, to have abortions whenever they want to have them, right?
Okay.
That's where our community is heading. So we're going to embrace abortion. I don't think it's healthy for an organization with the intention that we're, of American Islamic relations, that we want to be, furthering ideas based on mob rule, right? I think it should have some grounding within Islam, and then they will always represent that, no matter what the community, because the community can change, right? A community can today say, you know what, we don't, we're against LGBTQ, and tomorrow they can say we're pro it, right? Does CARE then bend to that? Are they going to say, because, well, the community wants it, we're going to do that? I don't know if that's a healthy way to move forward. I think that there has to be some core principles that are embodied, and they become the mouthpiece, because I'm not saying it's right or
I
wrong.
don't
I'm
know.
just
Would
conflicted.
you?
So the Muslim community is going to change, right? That's and hopefully the change is going to be better. It's possible that at some points it's going to be worse, right? But one of the big questions here is like where are the shuyukh, like where are the learned people within our community? And then I was really struck by that statement, the navigating differences
Mm-hmm.
statement, as to how it changed, altered the conversation within the Muslim community. And I mean, I thought that was one of the more impactful things that I've ever seen shuyukh and imams get together and do. Um, and I know that there's been a lot of criticism. Hey, why aren't you doing one on global warming, or why aren't you doing this one on that or that, whatever. I'm not too concerned about that. I do hope that there are, when you see that, okay, well, is the Muslim community heading towards endorsing fahisha because it's expedient for us to do so, when do we do something about that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And do shuyukh actually have the power to influence the conversation uh, and the tempo and the direction of the Muslim community
So what
in
you're
any
saying is that
way?
if the shuyukh do their job properly, that'll in turn motivate the community, and then the community will have an idea that that care will then just be the mouthpiece for.
Yeah, I mean, like, what are the shuyukh? I mean, like, I think that if we had a better system of Islamic teaching teachers, where a lot of them, a lot of them might be, there are some that are, that are celebrities, right? That are just they're basically like, I mean, the whole industry, the way this works, the whole sector of shuyukh is that it's kind of like entertainment and sports at this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's entertainment and sports in the sense that there's a bunch of the economics of it is that there are some people who are horribly exploited, and there are some people who have achieved fame and fortune.
Mm-hmm.
And there might be some in between as well. Um, and that's kind of where we are right now as a community. And if there was a way to if there was a way for this to be more of something that we as a community valued more, that we value having buildings, but we should also invest in our people. And exactly how we might do that is another question. But if we actually strengthen as a community, the people who are going to, if we're, if we as a community are kind of going astray, obviously that we hope that Allah will guide us and get us,
I
get
mean,
us to this to the straight path. And but I think that having good teachers and mentors um, as a community is just really part of that.
but to pay
And
to play
yeah,
Shaitan's advocate, right? I can just tell you right now that you know what the shuyukh will be like. We're just responding to what the community wants to, right? We're speaking about these ways because we're going to approach them in the manner that they understand, right? So, for example, we've seen numerous times where there's been lectures about where maybe a particular sheikh who's a celebrity now has had a former position on a matter, and then because of the way of the social justice climate, they may have made a message more palatable, right? And they may have adjusted it, and they will tell you, well, I'm speaking at the level that the people can understand, or that they'll relate to, or I want to keep them coming back, whatever. I mean, they have their reasons as to why they may not be as clear or as direct about what they're trying to condemn or endorse, for the very fact that the community, right? They're saying we want to keep the community, right? And that's the kind of the same thing I'm getting from CARE, that, well, we know what's right and wrong, but we can't do anything unless the community actually wants to do it, right? And so
yeah.
I feel like I feel like if you're in a position of leadership, that comes with responsibility, right? And I do view CARE as a position of leadership, right? Because
Are they really though? I mean,
they are, because they are. I mean, not leadership in the sense that they can decide right and wrong, but they have taken the mantle of speaking on behalf of Muslims.
more on a legal level though, right? Aren't they more? If I'm not mistaken,
I mean, it's
On the
a
media level.
Council of American Islamic Relations, so it's about media, legal, everything. I mean, they are the largest of its kind. Right? If something were to happen in the world, forget about legal or not, in the American community for the Muslims, they're going to contact CARE and say, come on and talk about it. Right? It's just
Well,
pretty
I mean,
much.
it kind of depends, right? Because it might be Engage,
yeah.
it might be
Okay.
Impact.
Well, that's new, right? I mean, I'm saying, but for a long time, CARE was the main.
The reason I'm saying that is
focus.
the reason I'm saying that is CARE generally by people are known for like civil rights lawyers, right, and attorneys, and that's what people usually think of is when you get in legal trouble as a Muslim, then they're going to represent you.
That's one of their extensions.
No, and I completely understand that.
Yeah, but I'm saying as a body, that's not all
But I don't
they
think
are.
a majority of Muslims that are actually involved in the Muslim community, they don't think of CARE as they don't even
No,
consider
we
them.
don't do that because we don't need someone to represent us. But I'm saying when you go out to the media, they're not contacting us.
That's true.
When there's op-eds, it's not us that's writing these things, right? Of course, we don't need that. We know what we believe.
Well, they're contacting Wajahat Ali is who they're contacting.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah. And the Shalom Hartman Institute. Yes, yeah, the MLI, right? Yeah. But, I mean, that's another problem too in itself. And by the way, this is no shade on CARE. I mean, obviously, they do a lot of great work. They've done landmark cases. They've they've taken a lot of BS to speak about. I mean, from both, from the Muslims and non-Muslims, they've taken a lot of heat. They've been under a lot of people have been under a lot of pressure within CARE from the government, and they've done their part. I'm just trying to say, for the purpose of clarity, right? Because part of what I look at is that as a community, we have a problem with leadership. Right, we really do. Right, we don't have this unified body, yet alone a core group of people that we can look to that are really crystal clear about what the pathway is for an American Muslim. Right, it's kind of like, well, this is a trend now. Okay, we can. This is what we can say about it. This is what we can't say about it. We kind of let the outside dictate to what our moves are going to be. Right, and I feel like that when you have shuyukh, I believe, who also should have responsibility in a certain field, but they're not politicians. They're not legal experts. There should be a core group of political people and legal experts that, with that same mindset of directing the Muslim community and having this, just kind of driving that forward. And I would like to see that maybe, perhaps in the future, that CARE be less reliant on what the community wants to, whatever their whims are, and more aligned with more so on the Islamic principles and kind of push that forward, and then obviously being sensitive of the Muslim need, but it should be more on the fact that we're directing this, right? And the community looks up to CARE and says, okay, cool, if they say it, then we actually have an organization that's out there speaking on their behalf, and we feel more comfortable actually having our opinions, right? Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I don't know. I'm just
So one of the issues with shuyukh, imams, whatever, is like, who are these people? Like, seriously, like, what is one? How do you become one? If you do something bad, how do you actually even not become one? Right? Like, what are the rules? What are the qualifications? And nobody really knows. I mean, I don't think anybody. I mean, nobody. There's nothing written down. There's no rules of ethics. At all, right? And one of the things I pointed out before is that if you want to sell like weed in California, there's rules of ethics that you need to follow. Right? You want to be an imam, you want to be a sheikh, you want to be like a social media sheikh, a rock star sheikh, whatever. There are no rules. There's nothing, nothing at all. You can just do whatever you want, right? And a lot of the times there are peers, there might be some informal relationships, things like that, but a lot of times there aren't, right? People just sort of they do what they're kind of in their own island a lot of the times, and sometimes they might get themselves in trouble just because of that, right? Because of the lack of community among shuyukh, frankly, that could sometimes exist. And when I say lack of community, not necessarily not meeting each other, but just advising each other.
Isn't that what AMJA is for? Like the American Muslim Jurist Association, where like they kind of get together and they just, I don't know, Sheikh Ahmed, can you tell us?
Assembly of Muslim Jurists.
Do they advise you over there?
No, the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of
stuff
America.
like that.
Yeah, so I think that this is a two-part thing. I think generally the tradition is when somebody graduates or completes or fulfills something in specializing in Islam or a specific Islamic discipline, there's an ijazah system that's followed. Yeah. And that ijazah gives you the understanding of how this was taught Islamically by way of the Sahaba Rasulullah. But I think what you're referring to is kind of like a council or a union. I don't really like the word union, but for example, say kind of like a union or unionizing of scholars, where scholars can hold each other accountable.
The federation.
And the federation.
Yeah.
And that even so, look, that's existed in the past. And
Union of Soviet Scholars Association.
Yeah, Soviet for some reason. But the dilemma is those kind of things always happen. So the problem with scholarship is, number one, you have this understanding of scholars historically didn't like to go towards politics, especially in politics of when Muslims actually had khulafa and quote-unquote Islamic governments. They didn't want to go anywhere near politics because it's understood that the politicians that have an Islamic understanding and the people's Islam at the forefront are going to be making the right decisions, and they have scholars amongst them that are actually consulting the cabinets and the khulafa and all that good stuff. So, but the scholars have never actually been in a position of power historically. Scholars are actually, even under the khulafa, like Imam Malik, like Imam Hanifa, they've been jailed even by the khulafa, right? And it's always a group of a few scholars even if it's Imam ibn Taymiyyah in his era, Ahmed ibn Hanbal in his era, and Ma'mun al-Rashid, who was the Khalifa, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, who were actually made examples out of because of their quote-unquote rebellion, right? So scholars have never actually had a type of union. It is a pretty cool idea. I don't see it happening, and I'll tell you why. It's not that I'm trying to not have confidence in this idea. Is that if somebody is a scholar, number one, they're usually, especially in the West, working for some organization. There's very few scholars that are autonomous. If they do become autonomous, they start off with working with organizations, being dependent on those organizations until they're able to free themselves eventually later in their life. And then by then they have a different element of teaching. They don't want to get too involved in things. They just want to teach. They want to stay away from the drama. You know what I'm saying? They've already kind of built their empire, so to speak. They don't want to risk anything that has to do. They don't want to risk anything, and they just want to, Mort, you said something really important. Is that there's this sentiment that started, especially after September 11th and a little before that, but mainly after that, is we don't want to push Muslims away. So we're going to tolerate a lot of this, and some of that was very true, and some of it I think was exaggerated, because sometimes we use that as a crutch. We use that as a weakness without knowing that it's a weakness, until we come out of that phase and we're like, man, I shouldn't have actually done that because I was being too lenient. I wasn't being mutashadid, I was being mutasahil, right? And mutasahil basically means that you're being extreme in your ease, right? So all in all, I think that the position of scholars, especially in the West, is there's a major dependency on organizations, and scholars have to be kind of in line, and they can't speak or get out of line, or else they're going to be blacklisted, and when they're blacklisted, it's going to be difficult for them to work anywhere else, which is a good idea for Muslim scholars to actually try not to make your sole income. This is my personal opinion. Try not to make your sole income off of an Islamic organization, because you'll have a little more wiggle room, you have a little more autonomy, you know what I'm saying? And if push comes to shove, when it comes to speaking the truth, you will do it, even if it has major ramifications, and that's just something that scholars have to be ready for, right? The tarbiyah portion.
So what about the notion of historically the waqf, right?
Yes.
And having, obviously you don't work directly for the government, but there's a waqf that's associated with. I mean, like a masjid, for example, is where a lot of imams will work right now. And one of the questions I have is seriously, like, who would want to grow up dreaming of necessarily having that job, right? Where
exactly
your
where
employment is dependent on often really toxic local community politics, right? Where you can be friends with some people, and then some people don't like you anymore, and then they hold a grudge and they run an election, and then they fire you, and then you're out of the job for a while, or maybe forever, and then you have driving Uber, or whatever the case may be. It's like, I mean, this is
it's real.
It's a pretty serious situation where, there aren't a lot of good jobs. A lot of times people will try to exploit you. Some markets have decent salaries for imams. Some don't, obviously, and some pay very, very badly. Some will just say, they're just going to be like, we're just going to find like a new immigrant who isn't going to be very picky about salary or whatever, and doesn't, there's going to be they're not going to. This is not something people will largely aspire to. Like if you're like 12 years old, 13 years old, or whatever, and like, okay, do you want to grow up and become like an imam? I mean, how many people do you actually see thinking in those terms? Right? I haven't seen very much of it, but I mean, you might be around more 12, 13-year-olds than me.
No, you're right. So I think the waqf element. I'll give you a small example of a contemporary. The waqf idea is beautiful, and there were certain times where it did flourish, and it brought lots of benefit. But the question that I have is, I mean, just for everybody, right? Not specific to you or anybody else, just everybody, is how autonomous are waqfs even today in Muslim countries, right? They're bound by the government. Yeah, they're bound by the government that's funding them to be kind of a mouthpiece for either an organization or the government itself, right? But in the past,
And they're also
yes,
the social political environment too, like
yeah,
India, where the Muslim community has become incredibly sad, right?
yes, you're right, you're right.
Because they have to respond to the political environment that they exist
Yes,
in.
yes, exactly. And I think as far as the tarbiyah, I really agree with you very much as far as the tarbiyah of scholars, which is kind of shifting. And many scholars know this obviously by theory, and many of them know it by practice, but it's something that has to be understood is that, whatever stance that you take, it has to be based on, it has to be grounded in our Islamic tradition and knowledge. And as long as you fully believe that it's the truth and you consult people that it's the truth, and you have to realize that there's going to be ramifications, right? That's the reason why I mentioned Abu Hanifa, who was, in jail, and Qadi Abu Yusuf and Imam Malik, Ahmed ibn Hanbal. These are all the people that came after the generation of the Sahaba, who were jailed because of their disagreements with power, right? And that's
Right.
something that scholars actually, I know they understand it. But we're coming in a time now where America was a very comfortable long honeymoon that we've lived in history. It's a very substantial part. It's a very beautiful part of history where it was there was so much ease that it seemed like nothing can go wrong because of the rights that we have and the
Right.
amount of affluency that we have in the communities that we work with. But nonetheless, it is, if anybody, the scholar's job, no matter who's behind them or who's not behind them, no matter who agrees with them or doesn't agree with them, is to speak of something which is a truth, no matter what the ramifications are. Now, it may not work for that generation that the scholars are working in, but people are definitely going to see that and use inspiration from that, like we do with all the scholars of the past that we mentioned, and even contemporary scholars, right? But that element of tarbiyah is something that I think has a delayed onset of leadership for the most part, meaning after the person passes away and people realize what that person did, then they start banding together, right? And it's not always that way. Am I making any sense? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Did I lose you guys completely? I don't know. I feel like I've been rambling on for a long time. You're giving me the blank look. But I think the tarbiyah aspect is very, very important on that level. And I think then if that idea of the end in the beginning is there, that at any moment I would have to sacrifice everything, and the condition of myself and my family can change instantly based on one disagreement that I have, that I'm going to stick to because it is so important, right?
Right.
And I think if that's the part of the tarbiyah, I think that if we have like-minded people that way, it can go two ways. It can get really, pretty extreme, or you can have a whole bunch of shepherds that elect a shepherd amongst them, a chief amongst them, and they work in unison as scholars and become a very strong force because of them realizing the sacrifice that they have to make, not because they're trying to win a popularity contest. Not because they've built an empire and trying to make sure nothing happens to it. It's a group of people that realize that every single second of this is sacrifice, and we may be living in an affluent community, but it can vanish overnight.
Right.
But we're still going to continue what we're doing. I think if we have like-minded scholars like that together, that band together, I think that they're going to be an unstoppable force in a good way, meaning that they're going to be able to sway lots of things. But at the end, look, one of the tests that Allah gives people of knowledge and people of sacrifice is that people may never realize what they said is true, and they just have to die that way. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I've
Well,
rambled on
Ahmed,
enough.
it was a pleasure to have you. There's so much more that I really encourage our listeners to go subscribe to you on your Substack. It's at ehsan.substack.com. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Awesome.
Well, it's great. It's great to hang out with you guys.
Yeah. It was way too long of a break between your last episode and right now. We got to have you on more regularly, and you got to.
Sheikh Amir, I do have like message me or what have you. I have I have a white paper that's not public that I'll share with you about
Please.
just that idea, the waqf idea. It's
Beautiful.
it's fairly lengthy, and I've just it's just been something that's been in my mind for a while as to that particular issue and how something like that would potentially work.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because very, very quickly, 30 seconds, is there something that you're working on right now that you can just kind of give everybody and myself and everybody else a teaser of something that's
brewing.
that's in the works. It's brewing. Yes.
So there won't actually. I'm on a bit of a hiatus from writing. I do have like there's like there's
There's no hiatus
immense
for the Dawa carrier. That's what we were taught when
there's
we
an
were young.
immense number of things that I would love to write about, and their timeliness, the timeliness of it might change, or the relevance of it might change between now and then. I think some of the things that we were talking about before, just the notion of what is a sovereign, what's sovereign and what's a vassal. I think also the issue of funding within the Muslim community, and the nonprofit funders, community leaders that come out that lead the community, but they actually work for people outside of the community, and the fact that we have a ton of hidden agendas within the community is a chronic problem, and I think it is important to identify these individuals. I wrote before about like M-Gage, which is these are like defense contractors. I mean, it's completely, I mean, like Zionist defense contractors that somehow become the leaders of the Muslim community, just overnight. I mean, a couple of them weren't even Muslim at all.
Wow.
And suddenly they're the people that are speaking at ISNA and everywhere else.
Running
And
schools.
it's actually there's a lot of really crazy stuff happening in our community, and not very much by way. I mean, there aren't that many people paying attention to this.
Do you
And
ever
I just
do
do
you
hope that
ever
there's
feel like you're not other than the Mad Mamluks? I'm not going to call out
Are
any
you
other
persona non
organizations.
grata? Are that you're gonna ask
Yeah,
me?
are people kind of trying to minimize your voice? Do you feel?
I don't know that I'm actually trying to amplify my voice too much. I write things just because I just I don't like I'm not big on, you don't see me very much on social media or
But you
anything like
should be
that,
though,
right?
because
So
you're putting in so much hard work, right? And you're
right. I
putting in
mean,
all this effort.
I'm a lawyer. I do estate planning, right?
Okay.
I mean, I do LLCs. I do things like that. I have a lot of clients. A lot of them appreciate the writing I do. For like I remember and I wrote about like the foreign agents. We had some Muslim leaders that are that work for the UAE. That type of thing. I wrote about that, and I mean, it's sometimes people just appreciate those types of things, but by and large, I mean, no, I write about. I've written, my book is about Islamic estate planning, so I wrote about that. And that's kind. But this is charities, nonprofits, this whole area is kind of interesting for a variety of reasons. A lot of them things that we just haven't discussed as well. And I'll probably do a lot of writing in that area, not necessarily just the what people refer to as the investigative journalism part of it. I mean, that's just something where I figure I had something to say, and so I said it, right? That's
Yeah.
what when I first started writing about this stuff, this was back in 2015. I really wanted somebody else to write about MPAC. I mean, I saw that the MPAC was this incredibly awful organization here in the Los Angeles area, and they were taking the lead in countering violent extremism, and I just looked to my left and looked to my right. And I was like, I'm the only one that's going to be able to write about this, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I want somebody else to do it, and I'll just go ahead and say what needs to be said. As far as I know, at least from people that I've come into contact with, there's mostly just appreciation for what it is that I've written. I don't get, no, I mean, I don't see a lot in terms of like enemies or haters or things like that. I do want to make sure that what I write is
Alhamdulillah.
rigorous to the extent possible. If I make a mistake, well, I hope I can minimize that type of thing. I'm sure that does happen. But the stuff that I write has to be supportable
Yeah.
to the greatest degree possible. And otherwise I won't write about it. I mean, I have other things to do. I mean, I don't necessarily need to write about it. So a lot of the times, especially in the during the CVE era, I talked to a lot of Muslim organizations that were involved with it. We resolved it without ever writing any articles. A lot of these concerns, when they're brought up to people, I think for the most part, the Muslim community is a great place to be. It's really good people, really good families. A lot of people just want the best for our community. But we have a lot of grifters operating here. There's a lot of really bad people as well, and we need
Yeah,
to be able to know the difference.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. I mean, you're
Hmm.
a valuable resource. Ahmed, please do not ever stop what you're doing. If you're not getting the platform, you have the Medvin Lukes as always.
Thank you very much.
As someone who can amplify your voice in whatever little way we can, please always don't hesitate to reach out and let us know whatever you're publishing or coming out with.
Are you coming by Chicago this weekend?
I am not, unfortunately.
Okay.
No Chicago for me this weekend. But
Okay.
Are you guys going to ISNA? Are you gonna be hanging out there?
I don't know. Depending on how good the bazaar is this year.
Yeah, I just care about just seeing some of our friends who come into town, and
Yeah.
it's not necessarily anything about nothing against the event itself. It's just
I think it's
I care about more about seeing people who may have
Yeah.
come in town.
So if anyone's gonna be in town, just holler at us. We'll be around the suburban area.
Last year we did a meetup at Giordano's.
Yeah. So maybe we can do that again.
Yeah,
And just
we'll tweet something out or throw something on my
Oh
Facebook
gosh,
page.
I'm coming.
All right, man.
Yes,
On us,
we'd
bro.
I'm
love
just
for you to
kidding.
have. I mean, I would love to host you in my house. We'll feed you, stuff you up
Okay.
with food, and you're welcome to bring your family too.
All right,
Oh
man.
gosh, yeah.
Beautiful.
We love Chicago.
Awesome.
Great,
Awesome.
great town. It's going to be good weather over there. It's going to be a nice
Inshallah.
Labor
Yeah,
Day.
Actually, it's gonna be super hot. It's gonna be in the
Oh, is it?
hundreds. This
No,
coming
90s, I
up
think.
with 99, 98.
Real feels. Real feels.
Oh,
over
real
100.
fuel is
Yeah,
over 100. Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
with the humidity, it can be over 100
Jeez.
degrees.
Allegedly.
All right.
Yeah,
I love the determiner of weather. You guys don't know anything.
yeah.
Anyways, we kept him
All right,
for a
guys.
while, man.
All right,
He's a
man.
busy
Thank you so
man.
much for
We'll
your
talk later,
time.
inshallah.
We'll talk to you later, inshallah. We'll see y'all
Assalamu
later
alaikum.
for our listeners. Help us out on patreon.com/the And if you are coming through this now, be sure to hit us up on Twitter or something. All right? We'll see you next time. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.